Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's episode by episode review of Lost Season 2 Part 3. This video is part of a series of videos where I cover every episode of Lost in parts. In this video, I will be covering episodes 17 through 23 of Season 2 of Lost, which takes us full to the season finale of Season 2, Live Together, Die Alone. So I'll start with a spoiler warning for Lost up to the end of Season 2. If you haven't seen it up to this point, you will not want to watch this video, otherwise some things may be spoiled for you. However, if you haven't seen beyond this point, don't worry. This video will not contain spoilers past Season 2. However, I will have a spoiler section at the end of the video for those who have seen up to the end of Lost, but I will give a proper spoiler warning before doing so. So I mentioned before that the first 4 seasons of Lost, the run of episodes towards the end of the season, tends to be the best run of episodes, and that is certainly true of Season 2. Perhaps even more so than it was with Season 1. When I watched the first 8 episodes of Season 2, I was starting to question whether Season 2 is still my favorite season of the show, but having watched the rest of the season, I'm completely certain now that it is. So the start of Season 2 was a bit rough. I did think it completely recovered in the later part of the season, and this run of episodes in particular feature all the elements that I love most about Lost. As Season 1 was a bit too much of a stereotypical disaster story, and later seasons would kind of lose the tone and feel that made Season 2 so great. These episodes illustrate the amazing emotional effect and comprehensive character story combined with the eerie, mysterious, fantastical, thought-provoking elements that, in my opinion, is the perfect blend for some of the best storytelling ever. It continues to play with non-linear storytelling in amazing ways, showing you different perspectives from previous events that make you view everything in a new light, as well as keeping you significantly intrigued, while also keeping an ever-present but not straightforward hit you over the head theme of fate and a greater purpose being involved, particularly as more and more characters start to appear in other characters' backstory, creating a feel of 6 degrees of separation. Now, I have heard some complain that this is where the show went wrong because it introduced too many mysteries that were never going to be resolved, but I disagree, as the fact that these mysteries weren't resolved in a satisfying manner I feel is more of a fault of the later seasons, not Season 2. Besides, I don't think all the mysteries necessarily needed a resolution, and some were better left having ambiguous enigmas. And I would argue since the sense of resolution and connection this run of episodes had with each other and the previous seasons was magnificent and unparalleled in the rest of the show. Anyway, enough preamble. Let me jump into the episodes, starting with episode 17, Lockdown. So this continues on the storyline with Henry Gale and the question of whether or not he is an other. And it's pretty fascinating on that account. While although the bulk of the story deals with the lockdown and Locke being trapped under the blast door and relying on Henry for help, most of this was kind of slow, but it was necessary to build the relationship between Locke and Henry. In fact, the ending of this episode was pretty genius, where it lures you into a false sense of security with Henry Gale, where it saves Locke's life. He saves Locke's life, pushes the button for him, and doesn't leave him behind, which he could have. This coupled with Locke's flashbacks reassert Locke's fear of being left alone, so when he hugs Henry at the end of the episode and thanks him for not leaving, it feels truly gratifying and well earned. But in a true Lost fashion, it takes that feeling of comfort and then pulls the rug right out from under you. Because at the start of the episode, it seemed like Henry's story is confirmed as Ana Lucia, Sayid, and Charlie. Rather than falling into a trap, they discover a grave and his balloon just as he described. However, when Sayid and the others return, they reveal that they digged up the grave to find a man whose name was Henry Gale, thus proving that the man they thought of as Henry Gale is lying. That was an amazing ending. Also, there are a lot of creepy, mysterious elements in this episode that are really intriguing, such as the weird glow-in-the-dark map of all the Dharma stations that lead to the question mark, the mysterious food drop, and of course, the question of why the lockdown happened in the first place. All very intriguing. Now, the flashbacks I thought were kind of just okay. It does show how Locke's romance with Helen ended in tragedy, as we assumed it did since they aren't together anymore, and it does build nicely off of the flashback that she appeared in previously, where John chooses his father's love over hers and she can't hack it. But I will say it does portray Anthony Cooper as too friendly a character, as it almost makes you sympathize. It almost seems like he's sympathizing with John. I mean, really, he's just using John to recover the money, but still, in the back catalog of things, it kind of confuses their relationship a bit. You could say, well, Anthony Cooper just ruined John's romance, but no, he didn't. Not really. It was John himself who ruined it with his need for his father's affections. It's a tragedy, to be sure, so it was okay. So overall, I'd say this was a pretty powerful episode. So next episode is Dave, and this episode did seem a bit of an aside, as I was all invested in the Henry Gale storyline, but this focuses on Hurley and his imaginary friend, although it does touch on how Henry is now that they know he's a liar, and it shows Saeed trying to kill him, and they had to throw him out, where Henry finally owns up to being one of the others, but insists that he's still a good man. But the bulk of the episode deals with Hurley. Now, it starts with the fact that he has a hidden stash of food, which, if I'm being honest, I was never a fan of this storyline, but I did like how he destroyed his stash, which was a very cathartic, healing moment for him, only to find that a whole pallet of new food just dropped, which is like a nightmare for him. At least this time they were smart enough to not just eat all of the food in one night. So when Charlie tried to put Hurley in charge of the food again, I sided with Hurley. That's a bad idea. So as for the story with Dave, the imaginary friend, despite the fact that that's not really how mental illness works, from a storytelling perspective, I thought that really worked. It was a good twist ending when they revealed he wasn't real. I didn't see that one coming, and the way it tied nicely into the story, the island storyline, was worked very well. Although I did think it was kind of an aside, it did not fit into every seeing weird shit on the island, and did explore Hurley's mental illness and how he'd have a hard time coping with what's going on the island. I particularly love the scene with Sawyer, where Hurley said that he was seeing a man in the bathrobe who wasn't really there, and Sawyer was like, "What, you mean that guy over there?" And when Hurley looked, Sawyer laughed and said, "Gotcha." And then Hurley beat the ever-loving crap out of Sawyer while calling out all the nicknames that he's ever called him. It was amazing, and I love how Jen was just laughing at it, and Sun had to nudge him to stop Hurley. That was funny. And the love story between Libby and Hurley worked very well. They had been building this for several episodes, and I think this is a great way to accumulate that storyline, because Libby was a therapist. She was trying to help Hurley work through his issues, but at the same time, she did see him as a potential lover, because she could see that he was a sweet, kind-hearted man. And I love that good selling point that Dave had, that the island was all in Hurley's head, was that the hot chick happened to just have the hots for him. And that did speak a lot to Hurley's low self-esteem in a way that was really relatable. In the flashbacks, we finally got the story of why Hurley was in a mental institution, which was hinted at in season 1. And I like how Lenny made a cameo with the numbers, and it was played kind of nonchalant, because of course it would be at this stage. And we learned that Hurley was in a mental institution because he was on a platform that collapsed, where several people died, and he blamed himself for that. It was an interesting exploration. The actor who played the therapist, a dude from the X-Men, did a great job. He fit this role very well. So although this episode didn't blow me away, it was still a pretty good, solid episode. So next episode is SOS, and this episode is a clear-cut case of filler, and thus can be a bit frustrating to watch. Just as the story of Season 2 is winding down to its conclusion, it pretty much grinds to a halt in this episode so we can focus on 2 minor characters. However, that being said, I still like the episode and I don't think it's that bad. Whereas on IMDb, it's ranked has the 5th lowest episode of the entire show. So apparently, a lot of people think much lower of this episode than I do, because I don't think it's anywhere near that bad, and I think there are plenty of worse episodes out there. Although I will say the island storyline with Bernard building the SOS sign was a complete and total filler, as it added absolutely nothing to the show and was just a giant waste of time. Plus, it was just silly the way that he pissed everyone else off around him until they quit. That was a bit silly. However, I did like getting Rose and Bernard's backstory. That was nice, as it was interesting to learn that Rose was another example of someone who was healed by the island, as she had a terminal illness that was cured by the island, and Bernard thought that some faith healer that he took her to in Australia had healed her, who is, by the way, played by the same actor who plays Scorpio on Farscape. It took me a while to recognize him without the GIMP suit. Anyway, that was interesting too, because it does tease that the island is very special because its electromagnetic energy, has the faith healer talked about there being a few places in the world with special electromagnetic energy that could heal people, but the place they were at in Australia wasn't the place for her, which of course implies that the island is the place for her. And so, unlike Claire's psychic, it does appear that the faith healer was actually genuine and not a fraud. And I did find it really touching when Bernard found this out. He wasn't mad at her and just realized that if she can't leave the island, that he's not going to leave either, which was pretty nice. I also liked the reveal that Rose saw Locke in the wheelchair at the airport, so is aware that the island healed him as well. Although I do think all of these are retcons and it wasn't thought up until they wrote this episode, but it doesn't particularly jar with anything previously established, so I'm ultimately okay with it. Although the biggest retcon is probably the reveal that Bernard and Rose just got married, and in fact, while they're on their way back from their honeymoon when the plane crashed. That's an obvious retcon, not for anything specific that was said, but when watching the scene with Rose in the pilot episode talking about her husband, it's obvious that she's talking about someone who she's been married to for years. Again, that's just an impression I got. It was never stated implicitly, but it was a strong impression. Anyway, we also get a side plot of Jack and Kate going out in the jungle to try to meet the others to arrange a trade, and they just ignore him until Michael comes running out into the jungle, which was really the only useful part of this episode to the overall storyline. So I do disagree that this episode was terrible, but it wasn't great either. It was okay. So next episode we get is Two for the Road, and when talking about this episode, I must jump straight to the ending because this ending was groundbreaking. I think this was a precursor to the Ned Stark losing his head ending and was just as groundbreaking and shocking. In fact, if I'm being honest, this ending shocked me more, and I remember being so shocked, so in awe of what I just saw that I couldn't even move. I couldn't believe what I just watched. Now, with Ned Stark thing, they killed off their main character of the show, which did surprise me because of that, and here they killed off two characters who were just introduced this season, so that aspect of it wasn't as shocking, but what was more shocking to me wasn't who died, but who killed them. Having one of our main characters who was introduced in the very first episode, who we cared about and followed, Michael, be the murderer was indeed extremely shocking. This moment alone, I think, makes this an extremely powerful episode. But the scenes leading up to it weren't that bad either, as it further establishes Henry Gale as a douchebag, and I love how he believes that he's like the good guy, and he's the victim, and Ana Lucia is the bad guy. That version is obviously delusional, and the others kidnap children, and they terrorize a group of people who just survived a plane crash instead of, helping them. So clearly he's not the good guy. But as they say, the best written villains are those who believe they are the heroes of their own story. And Ana Lucia wanting revenge for what Henry did to her, and of course for being terrorized by the others all that time. But when it comes to killing him in cold blood, she finds that she can't do it, and because she can't do it, this leads to her own death, which is very tragic. The whole episode is extremely and effectively tragic, and her backstory builds nicely into this as well, as she quits after killing a man in cold blood and runs away to Australia with a random stranger that just so happens to be Jack's father, Christian Shepherd. So a lot of this story I felt was just playing into Christian's stories, so really developing Jack's background, but I did like the conclusion of how Ana Lucia realized that she needed to stop running away and return home. But of course, she doesn't make it home. She crashes on an island where Michael kills her. So again, adds to the overall tragedy of the episode. So great episode, very powerful. So next episode is Question Mark, which is another great creepy episode that builds off the momentum of the previous episode. We see how they deal with Libby and Ana Lucia being killed, which is heartbreaking when Hurley finds out, but suspenseful that we see Libby still alive and Michael is freaked out that she's going to tell on him. And the whole time I'm watching this, I'm hoping that she will tell on him, but all she manages to do is say Michael, to which Jack replies, "Oh, he's okay." That's so frustrating, but still pretty heart-wrenching. But the episode deals more with Mr. Eko receiving dreams that send him on a quest similar to what Locke experienced in Season 1. In these dreams, Eko sees his dead brother Yemi, and Yemi tells him to take John and go find the question mark. This, of course, refers to the map that Locke saw in Lockdown that leads to a question mark. So Mr. Eko goes with Locke on the pretense of trying to find Henry, but really they don't even try. Instead, they go to the same spot where the beach plane crashed, which just so happens to be where the question mark is. I find that a bit silly, but whatever. So they find another Dharma station, this one called the Pearl, that seems to be set up a bit later than the Swan because it features a videotape from Marvin Candle, but he now calls himself Dr. Mark Wickman, and his instructions is for the participants to sit in front of monitors and monitor and record a psychological experiment in progress, which is basically monitoring those in the Swan station. There's a printer readout and tubes that they're supposed to take all the notes on of what everyone does, and Locke takes it to mean that the button is a joke, which he had already had his doubts since Henry Gale had told him that he never pressed the button. But it has the opposite effect on Mr. Eko, who wants to push the button even more and sees this video as a test. This is all very intriguing stuff and adds to the mystery of the island, whereas in flashbacks we see Eko in Australia while he's planning to come to America while he's pretending to be a priest, but is he's sent on an investigation by the church to see if a miracle happened. Now, I have my doubts that investigations like this exist, but whatever. Anyway, he finds there was no miracle, and further we see Claire's psychic, where he reveals that he is a fraud, and in fact, in a deleted scene that's hidden on like a DVD extra, he even goes as far as to say that he was paid by a couple in LA to lie to a pregnant woman to give her baby up to them to adopt. This is interesting, but I wouldn't say it's the whole story. But more importantly, when Mr. Eko meets the girl who supposedly died, she has a message for him that his brother Yemi is waiting for him and will see him again soon. So, very ominous. Anyway, this is all pretty intriguing and effectively creepy episode, so pretty good stuff. So, next episode is 3 minutes, and I love episodes like these where similar to Maternity Leave, instead of giving us character flashbacks to events that occurred before the character came to the island, we see events from earlier in the show but from a different perspective. In this case, it fills in the gap of what happened to Michael when he left to go find Walt in the hunting party up until he reappears in the SOS. Of course, we already know at this stage that Michael has betrayed his friends and is somehow in league with the others, and as one could guess, it's because they promised to give him his son back if he did what they wanted them to. But it's interesting that we learned that basically it was the others who were talking to him on the computer to begin with and not Walt, and they did it to lure him out into the open so they could kidnap him. And at first they were asking him questions about Walt, but refusing to let him see Walt, but later they specifically said that something has changed, so this must have been when Henry was captured by Rousseau. So it implies that it wasn't their original plan to use Michael in this manner. So Michael agrees to help them only if he gets to see Walt, and they allow him only 3 minutes, hence the name of the episode. It was so heart-wrenching. Plus, it hints at the nature of the others, where Walt mentions they've been making him do tests, so Michael agrees to help them, but he wants the boat as well. So this all makes a lot of sense why Michael did what he did, but on the island we see him dealing with the guilt over having just killed 2 people, and while trying to hide this fact. And he tries to get Jack Sawyer, Kate, and Hurley to come out and go get his son, so he says, but really it's a trap, because those are the specific 4 people that the others asked for. And I love how Sayid is able to figure out that Michael is lying and working with the others, because the show has already established Sayid is a skilled lie detector and can tell when someone is lying or hiding something, especially someone like Michael, who isn't as skilled at lying. Meanwhile, they have a funeral for Libby and Ana Lucia, which is very sad, so in some ways this episode sets the stage for the finale, but I think it does it amazingly well, and is an extremely intriguing episode in its own right, as it reveals what Michael had been up to and deepens the mysteries with the others. So I love this episode, and I think it's excellent. So finally we come to the season finale, Live Together, Die Alone. Now, as I've said before, this is my favorite episode of the entire show. I'm not sure if I'll feel the same way after my complete rewatch of the series, so I'll just have to see. Either way, I love this episode. It embodies everything I love about Lost. Deepens the mysteries, weird happenstances, getting resolutions to some of the previous mysteries, getting an excellent and emotional character backstory while exploring all other of our characters, putting them all to the test. This episode was just epic. It starts by reintroducing Desmond into the show. In fact, makes this his flashback episode, which I thought was an amazingly bold move, something that the show hasn't done before, because typically flashback episodes were reserved for main characters that we were already very familiar with. And honestly, at this stage, I didn't expect to see Desmond again, as I thought they were going to do with him what they did with Rousseau, where he's just be roaming around the jungle, and the island survivors, our main characters, would just come across him every once in a while. Has he only appeared in the first 3 episodes of the season, and we hadn't seen him since then. But the explanation they give us as to why we haven't seen him actually fits perfectly, and that's because that he had a boat, which kind of makes sense why he ran off in the first place, because now that there were other people there to push the button for him, he could finally go home. But another mysterious element of the island is revealed, is that apparently he can't escape, and every time he tried to leave, he just ended coming right back to the island. Of course, at the end of the episode, Henry tells Michael to set a very specific course in order to leave the island, and says that once he leaves, he'll never be able to find the island again. So this implies you have to go on a very specific bearing in order to leave the island, and the fact that it can't be found again hints at some magical abilities. In any event, it was amazing to get Desmond's backstory, not only on how he came to the island, but what he did while he was there, how he started pushing the button, and some of the incidents that occurred. And it was a very effective, very powerful backstory having to do with lost love and the desire to better oneself or improve oneself. And through this storyline is really what makes this episode so amazing. And from here on out, Desmond becomes my favorite character of the show, as this episode is amazing in fleshing out this character. And of course, this character story is coupled with other epic stories where all the main characters of the show get storylines that conclude their arcs of the season, such as Michael finally getting reunited with his son, but it comes at the expense of his friends getting captured by the others. And we learn more about the others, particularly that they are smarter and more devious than the survivors give them credit for, as they successfully tricked them. Even when Jack and Sayid saw through their trap, they just trapped them anyway. And there was a lot of just cool imagery, such as the intro to the four-toed statue, Jack and his group finding the spot of all the notes where that went in the tubes from the pearl, being pretty much in the middle of the jungle, and things like that. However, the biggest payoff has to be the revelation of what happens when you don't push the button. This is something I believe the season absolutely needed to pay off, and it did it in the most amazing way imaginable, with the revelation that Desmond failed to push the button once before, and it was the day that Flight 815 crashed, meaning that he caused the crash. But in that case, he managed to get it under control. But here, John is so convinced that everything is meaningless, he destroys the computer, meaning that they can't fix it. So the only alternative is the failsafe key, which the effects of turning the key would have. What effects the turning the key would have are unpredictable, which, yes, is why they never used it before. But it results in a really weird, freaky sequence of the sky going all purple and shaking and a deafening noise. It was absolutely freaking amazing sequence. Loved it. And the fact that it's tied into Desmond's love story made it even more powerful. And I love how we see the other perspective of when Locke was banging on the hatch back in season 1 after Boone died, that Desmond almost killed himself at the exact same time, but it was Locke banging on the hatch which stopped him, because it proved to him that the outside world still exists. And again, this plays with the themes of fate. And on top of all that, it ends with a scene that for the first time in the history of the show, it has a scene that takes place off island in the current timeline after the plane crashed, that shows Desmond's lover Penny has been out in the Arctic somewhere monitoring for strange electromagnetic events such as the one that just occurred. And what a mind-blowing cliffhanger that was. It was an amazing roller coaster of an episode, a show ending on many cliffhangers. So yes, this episode is excellent, fantastic, amazing. I cannot praise it enough. So those are all the episodes of Season 2. So in the continuing tradition of when I come to an end of the season, I'm going to name my top 3 worst episodes of the season and my top 3 best episodes of the season. Let's start with my top 3 worst episodes of the season, starting with my number 3 worst episode, and that is Adrift. Adrift was a boring episode that didn't really need to exist, that just showed Michael and Sawyer whining at each other, and then we get scenes that could have easily been in the previous episode. So next is my number 2 worst of the season, and that is And Found, which was a colossal waste of time about Sun trying to find her wedding ring, while we get some of the most boring and unnecessary flashbacks in the whole show. So now let's get into my number 1 worst episode of Season 2, and that is easily Fire and Water. This episode wasn't just unnecessary and boring, but is actively irritating to watch and undoes a lot of progress that the show has made in their character stories. It makes no sense in the larger context of the show, and it's just overall a badly written episode in every way imaginable. So now let me get into my top 3 best episodes of the season, the 3 best episodes of Season 2, and we'll start with my number 3, The Other 48 Days. This was a groundbreaking original episode where Lost breaks its format to give us the continuous backstory of new characters who are also in the plane that crashed that we've been following for the whole show. My number 2 favorite episode is Maternity Leave, another episode that shakes up the format of Lost by, instead of flashbacks to characters' life before they came to the island, we follow Claire as she recalls the time that she spent after she was kidnapped by the others, which was absolutely stunning and led to some very interesting mysteries and revelations. This, combined with getting an adventure involving an unusual team-up of Kate, Claire, and Rousseau, I found completely compelling. So now I'll get into my number 1 favorite episode of Season 2, and that is Live Together, Die Alone. This episode encapsulates everything I love about Lost: great, compelling, emotional character stories combined with bizarre mysteries, revelations, twists, and turns. It also goes above and beyond what any episode has done previously and took us a minor guest star in Desmond and turned him into one of the show's best and most beloved characters. So my rating for Season 2 as a whole, out of 10, is a 10 the best. And as I often say whenever I give a season of television a 10, it doesn't mean it's perfect, because there's no such thing as a perfect season of television. 10's just relative to seasons of television. It's as good as a season of television can get. And this season does have its pitfalls, particularly with Fire and Water. But overall, I feel this season is the show at its best, where the character stories are the most interesting, combined with unique mysteries, thrilling stories of survival, and just a lot of weird, absurd stuff that I love. And most of the episodes, with a few exceptions, were of high quality, very enjoyable, so definitely a great season of television. So that's it for my spoiler-free section of part 3 of my review of season 2 of Lost. If you haven't seen up to the end of all 6 seasons of Lost, you will want to stop watching this video now. Thanks so much for watching, and be sure to check out my channel as I continue to cover Lost. In 2 weeks, I will return with part 2 of my series on how I would write Lost. However, that will also contain spoilers up to the end of Lost, but I will be back for my review of season 3 of Lost in about a month, where I will cover the first 8 episodes of season 3 up to episode 8, Flashes Before Your Eyes. So if you're watching the show along with me, you have until then to get caught up. And be sure to check out my channel for many more videos on other shows like Star Trek, The Expanse, Game of Thrones, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching. However, if you have seen up to the end of Lost, you can follow me to my spoiler section, which begins now. So let's start with Lockdown, as there are several mysteries introduced in this episode. That is to say, many viewers complain were never explained or didn't make any sense, such as the lockdown, the food drop of the Dharma food, and the glow-in-the-dark map to the question mark. Now, the lockdown was never really explained beyond a vague explanation that it happened during the food drop, but that doesn't really explain it. During the Dharma days, I see no reason why they would want to lock down those in the Swan Station from the food drop. Not to mention the fact that the button needs to be pressed every 108 minutes, or the world is going to end. It makes potentially locking people out of the room with the button in it that needs to be pressed to prevent the end of the freaking world makes the whole lockdown thing the most idiotic idea to exist in the history of the world. It really portrays the Dharma Initiative folks like a bunch of insane maniacs who get their kicks from playing a game of Russian roulette with the fate of the entire freaking world. So ultimately, the lockdown only seems to exist in the show for the purposes of plot. They need to drive the plot of this episode to have to force Ben and Locke to work together in a crisis, and then later in the finale they need to lock Mr. Eko out of the button room so that John and Desmond can purposely run down the clock without interference. It's a wall of convenience for the plot, that is. In particular, in practical terms, it's the dumbest idea ever. Now, as far as the glow-in-the-dark map, I'm going to have to call plot convenience for this one too. Now, granted, in the finale, Kelvin mentioned that his old partner, Rosinski, used to like to draw with the glow-in-the-dark thingy. But why? What purpose could he have to drawing a map that emphasizes the question mark, which, as we learn, is actually the Pearl Station? And the existence of the Pearl Station is a whole other bowl of issues, but I'll get into that later. So as far as the map is concerned, I've heard no plausible reason for its existence other than flimsy fan-splaining involving unproven fan theories. So really, the real reason is that the writers wanted it to exist for the plot, so they did it, and there's nothing more to it than that. Now, the food drops was another really weird thing that up until the end of the show, fans were still complaining that it wasn't answered. However, it was answered in the DVD featurette short film, The New Man in Charge, which was just a way of rapid firing a bunch of answers at the audience as a failed attempt to try to get fans to stop pointing out how many mysteries were unresolved. In this case, it revealed that a couple of people in the warehouse in Guam were still getting paid to drop packages of Dharma food on the island because of an oversight, a clerical error. I'm sorry, but that is the biggest load of bullshit that I've ever heard. You're telling me there are multiple factories that mass produce food with custom Dharma Initiative labels and ship it to Guam to be airlifted and dropped on a magical moving island because of a clerical error? Get the fuck out of here. And fuck you for treating me like I'm a moron. This explanation is completely unsatisfactory and just a lame attempt to cover up the fact that this was never explained. Although I do think it's possible that the writers originally did have an idea in mind when they did this episode, but later abandoned the idea, and I think that's entirely possible as well. So next episode is Dave, so let's talk about Dave. I'm not sure if at the time it was made, the thought behind Dave's appearance on the island was that it was the smoke monster. Maybe. I mean, we've seen people appear to other characters before, like Jack seeing his dad, Kate seeing the horse, Mr. Echo having dreams of Yimmy. But then again, maybe it was just meant to be the island fucking with Hurley. Or maybe it's implied that Hurley was really just imagining Dave. But in the lens of what we see in the future seasons, one could say that this was in fact a smoke monster who appeared to Hurley as Dave to try to kill him. Because the smoke monster, or the man in black, can't kill candidates directly, but he really wants to kill the candidates, but he can kill them indirectly, which is what Dave tries to do here, because he convinces Hurley it's all in his head, so he tries to talk Hurley into killing himself. So this does in fact fit perfectly with what we know of the smoke monster of the final season, probably even more so than most of the other earlier appearances of the smoke monster. But do I think that the writers had this in mind when they wrote this episode? Oh, hell no. I think it's possible when they were writing season 6, they may have thought back to this episode and thought, well, this fits with this. Maybe, I don't know, it's a realm of possibility. I kind of think that the writers when writing season 6 didn't even think this season 2 existed, honestly. But, I'll get to that when I get to season 6. Also, let's talk about Libby, because in this episode, you see the big reveal, the big shocking ending. It shows that Libby was at the mental institution with Hurley, but this is never followed up on ever again. There's no follow-up to it. It's just something that people were demanding follow-up for, and they never got. And season 6 was coming out. Damon Lindelof and all them were like, oh, Libby's going to be in season 6 and it's going to answer all your questions. So like, no, not really. Because it didn't. She just appeared in a flash sideways bullcrap. And they never addressed the fact that she was in the mental institution. And as I talked about in the previous video, in earlier episodes when Hurley was saying that he recognized her, it was obvious that she knew exactly what for. And that she was hiding it. Now, you could say, I mean, the showrunners probably just say, oh, she was at the mental institution with him and she was embarrassed, so she was hiding it from him. But it does seem like there could have been more to it than that. And particularly combined with the fact that she was the one who gave Desmond his boat, which got him to the island. That was very interesting. Because, I mean, you could say it's just Lost being serendipitous like it always is, where people just happen to appear and there's fate. So she just happened to be at the same mental institution with Hurley. She just happened to give Desmond the boat that got him to the island. But, I don't know. There were always, like, crazy theories out that she was working with some people attached to the island, like with the Jacob or someone, and was helping people get to the island, and she was there in the mental institution to spy on Hurley. But that's actually, pie in the sky theorizing. But honestly, I think it would have been fascinating had the show went that route, or at the very least just followed up in any way, shape, or form on Libby's backstory and why she was at the mental institution. I don't know this for certain, but I suspect that when this scene was filmed at the end of Dave, that they didn't know at this stage that they were going to kill Libby off. And so I think they might have had more things planned with her. And yeah, because there's a lot of rumors that they killed off this character because the actress got a DUI and was apparently hard to work with. which I don't know how true those rumors are, but it seems to be the case because the killing off with Libby seemed to be a change of directions. The writers excuse it by saying they realized that Ana Lucia wasn't a very beloved character, so killing her off wouldn't have the impact that they wanted, so they needed to kill off another character as well who would have more impact on the audience. But really, Libby was kind of a minor character, so I wouldn't really say she had that much impact on the audience either. I mean, it had more direct impact on Hurley, but still it seemed like very misdirection. And the scene with her in the finale with Desmond was kind of maybe just a send-off to her, an homage or whatever. But I still think that they should have done something with her backstory, and I think maybe they shouldn't have even killed her off. That's just me. Anywho, also in this episode, Ben talks about how their leader is a great man, but not a forgiving man. And when Ana Lucia suggests the man with the beard is the leader, Ben says, "Oh, him, he's nothing." Now, I remember the scene because it was often quoted in regards to people who came up with theories that there was another leader of the others other than Ben. In fact, in Season 3, Mikhail says that Ben isn't their leader, so of course he's referring to Jacob. But the thing is that nobody except Richard ever sees Jacob. However, Ben does lie to everyone and claims to speak directly to Jacob and to speak for Jacob, but Jacob's never really there, so it's a stretch to call him the leader of the others. He's more of a deity or an icon of worship for the others. Ben is the one who is effectively leading them. But leaving that aside, because you can make some arguments that they think that Jacob's their leader because Ben's saying he's speaking for them. So leaving that aside, in this scene when Ben talks about the leader being a great man, he's really talking out of his ass because he never talked to Jacob and he's the leader. But the real answer is at this stage they hadn't decided that they were keeping Michael Emerson around in the show, as he was originally intended just to be a brief guest star. So it's possible they didn't even know that they were going to make him the leader of the others. It's only because they liked him so much that they decided to keep him around. Now, I don't know for certain if they had decided to keep him around when this episode was filmed, but either way, they clearly didn't know what they were going to do when they wrote that line. They just had it there because it sounded cool. Anyway, let's get into the next episode, which is SOS, which I actually don't have anything to say about regarding spoilers, so let's move over to the next episode, which is Two for the Road. So here I want to talk about Christian Shepherd in the scene where he's in Australia yelling at a woman demanding to see his daughter. Now, everyone and their mother predicted that the daughter he was referring to was Claire, which in fact it did turn out to be the case, as it was revealed in Season 3. This was telegraphed almost too much because we knew this daughter would be revealed, and knowing Lost, it's likely to be a known character. So which known female characters from Australia in the right age to be Christian's daughter? Claire, of course. However, I strongly believe that the woman he was yelling at in the scene was originally intended to be Claire's mother. It just seems to fit and make more sense. But when they did Pan Avion, they decided to do a story about Claire's mother being in a coma for years, so that didn't work, so they simply made this character Claire's angry aunt. And I think they made a point in that episode to portray her as angry and hostile, so her behavior in this scene would make more sense, but still I'm not buying it. That simply an aunt would get this upset and refused to let his father see her niece. This still strikes me as more behavior of an angry mother. Also, the whole storyline of Claire's mother being in a coma for years is already completely inconsistent with what is established in Raised by Another, where many references were made about Claire's mother, references that would make no sense if she was in a coma. Therefore, it's obvious to me that the whole storyline was just invented for that episode when they did that in Season 3, and so they weren't thinking about it when they did this episode, so I think they originally intended this woman to be Claire's mother. So, next episode is question mark. So let's talk about the Pearl Station. Further evidence that the Dharma Initiative are a bunch of crazy psychos that get their kicks out of playing Russian roulette with the fate of the entire world. So the Pearl is a station where a couple of people watch the participants in the Swan Station and record absolutely everything they do, write it in notebooks, send it back to headquarters, and the instruction video of the Pearl refers to what's going on in the Swan Station as a psychological experiment in progress. The funny thing is that in the season 3 episode, The Man Behind the Curtain, in the past, Ben's father casually refers to going to the Pearl, which means its existence is well known. Now, granted, maybe they don't know what's going on there, but still the risk of the participants of the Swan finding out, who would then be under the impression that pushing the button is complete and total bullshit, so they would stop pushing the button and cause the end of the world. Again, this could be avoided had they simply told those in the Swan Station what was really going on. Also, why fuck around with people in the Pearl recording everything that people in the Hat and the Swan Station do when what those in the Swan are doing is important to prevent the end of the world? Now, one possible explanation is that the Dharma Initiative wanted to monitor those in the Swan to make sure that they're still okay, they're not going crazy, so they'll still be capable of pushing the button that saves the world, and if they're not capable, so they could be replaced because their job is vital. But if that was the case, why not simply tell those in the Pearl this, or have people in the Pearl who know about the Swan calling it a psychological experiment when really it's people who are preventing the end of the world is a horrible idea, and they don't take the job as seriously as they should. And as I mentioned, if those in the Swan find out about the Pearl, which in fact is exactly what happens in this episode, it makes the button look like bullshit when it's not, so this is colossally dumb. Anyway, next episode is 3 minutes, and it's kind of funny that the others are pretending to be all these hillbillies with scraggly clothes, and they even went as far as to set up a makeshift village with a fake Dharma Initiative door that leads to nothing in order to trick the plane crash survivors. Okay, so first off, why? Secondly, why then, as soon as this is revealed to the audience, they immediately drop the facade, completely get rid of all of their disguises, and simultaneously seem to lose all of their supernatural jungle skills and become a bunch of suburban yuppies and incompetent thugs. But whatever. However, as far as the others giving Michael Walt and letting them both go, I do buy this, as it does make a lot of sense. From everything implied, they wanted Walt because he had these special abilities, yet unlike Claire, whom we saw was brainwashed and trusted the others, Walt seemed totally cognizant and talked about tests he was forced to take, and he still didn't trust the others at all. And one of the webisodes, it was revealed that they did in fact try to brainwash Walt using Room 23, but it didn't work on him. He ended up killing a bunch of birds. So his special abilities made him impervious to it, which again I think completely fits and makes sense why they would let him go, because their attempts to brainwash him and their attempts to get him to join them didn't work, so he was useless to them. And so it would seem his greater use would be to motivate Michael to get Ben back and lead Jack, Kate, and Sawyer into their trap. So finally we come to Live Together, Die Alone. So okay, several things I want to talk about with this episode. First, let's get into one of the biggest continuity issues when trying to establish a timeline. Now, you may or may not have heard of this website online where you can watch Lost in chronological order, where they took all the flashbacks, all the out-of-order sequences, they put them all in chronological order. I didn't watch this because, in truth, I did this myself several years ago, except I didn't put it online. I just made DVDs for my own personal viewing experience. I checked out the online, just their outline to see what they did compared to what I did, and there are a few things that are different because a lot of flashbacks are just guesswork, but it was mostly the same. But the biggest issue that I came across when trying to map out this timeline that perhaps anyone would come across when trying to establish a timeline regarding the Dharma Initiative is when exactly did the purge occur? That is, when were the Dharma Initiative wiped out by Ben and the others, as seen in the episode Man Behind the Curtain. And here's why that's an issue. Because in Rousseau's backstory, it's established that she came to the island in 1987. This is made very clear. And she went to the radio tower, which was deserted, and changed the message that was playing. It was playing the numbers, so she took that message down and changed it to her distress call. However, in this episode, we saw Calvin Inman in the Swan Hatch, and he claims to have been recruited by the Dharma Initiative, so this obviously had to be before the Purge, before the Dharma Initiative were wiped out, which again, judging by Rousseau's backstory, had to be before 1987. Problem is that Kelvin Inman appeared in Saeed's flashback during the Gulf War of 1991, meaning Calvin had to come to the island sometime after 1991, which is quite impossible because it would mean the Dharma Initiative was still on the island when Rousseau got there. In fact, that they continued to be on the island for at least 4 years after her arrival. Not only was the radio tower deserted, indicating the Dharma Initiative were no longer around, also, she changed their broadcast. If they were still there, why didn't they change the broadcast back or, answer her distress call? In Dead is Dead, in the flashback where Ben takes Alex from Rousseau, the others are still intense, suggesting that they hadn't taken New Otherton yet from the Dharma Initiative. So this episode subscribes to the Kelvin timeline. Aha! See what I did there? Get it? Kelvin timeline because it's Kelvin Inman. Anyway, they ascribe to the timeline of the Purge happening after 1991, but as I said, it's quite impossible when compared to Rousseau's backstory. Plus, all the level of technology that the Dharma Initiative possesses is clearly around the late 70s or early 80s era. They do not have any 90s era technology. So any way you slice it, this is a huge era. Also, Kelvin refers to his original partner as Rosinski, who we met in Season 5, who was the brains behind the Swan Station and was fully involved in the Dharma Initiative. In fact, he took over the Dharma Initiative at one stage, meaning he knows all about the Swan, all about the incident, all about everything, but he didn't feel fit to share this information with Inman before blowing his brains out. So now let's talk about the failsafe key, because I know many have complained about the failsafe key, saying it doesn't make sense. Why didn't it just use the failsafe key in the first place? But I don't have an issue with this because, as is stated in this episode, they had no idea what the failsafe key would do. It was just that, a failsafe, a backup in case the button failed and all hope was lost. So hey, might as well try this key and see what it does. Now, there's been some speculation on what turning the key actually did. Some speculate it set off a nuclear explosion similar to what happened in the 5th season episode, The Incident. Because in that episode, it was the Dharma Initiative's drilling that disrupted the electromagnetism of the island and nearly caused the end of the world. And so some speculate it was Jack setting off an atomic bomb that temporarily stopped this, but they had to set up the button to slowly vent this phenomenon. Now, I'll address the bomb when I get to Season 5, but I heard many say that, setting off a nuclear explosion would simply wipe out everything on the island. But I think the show implies that if the bomb is set off at the heart of this electromagnetism, the electromagnetism absorbs all of the energy from the blast so that the bomb only affects it and doesn't actually cause a traditional nuclear explosion. Might not be very scientifically accurate, but Lost is mostly a fantasy show, and I do believe that's what they were implying. But maybe not. Maybe the failsafe key wasn't a nuclear explosion, it did something else. But whatever it did, it managed to work and make the button unnecessary. But point is, they didn't know it would work. So finally, let me get to the final scene of the episode with the two Brazilians in the Arctic station who call Penny. Although we don't know if they're in the Arctic, maybe they're just in someplace very cold or high in the mountains in the winter or whatever, but looks like the Arctic to me. In any rate, I mean, what I said earlier about loving the scene and being so mind-blowing and original for the show. Problem is, it was never followed up on in any significant manner. And the constant, when Desmond is on the phone with Penny, she starts to talk about how she's been looking for him, but static conveniently interrupts what she's saying so we can't hear her. And in There's No Place Like Home, where Penny shows up to rescue the Oceanic Six, she says that she found Desmond by his phone call. His phone call. No reference to what those dudes in the Arctic found, although one of those Brazilian dudes were there on the boat with her, but so what? That doesn't actually explain anything. And in season 5, where Penny and Desmond live together on a boat, absolutely nothing is said about the time she spent looking for him and what the deal with that Arctic station and those Brazilian guys were. Now, I know some may say, well, what? Penny was looking for Desmond and she found him. What else do you want to know? Well, lots of things. So, the two Brazilian dudes in the outpost were there, and they have alarms going off, and it's heavily implied that the alarms refer to the electromagnetic incident that just occurred with the purple sky and everything once Desmond turned the failsafe key. In fact, they refer to a previous incident that was a false call, which obviously refers to the incident when the plane crashed where Desmond pushed the button a bit late. So there wasn't an actual electromagnetic event. But no, this time it's the real thing, they say, because it was the key that turned the whole thing off. So the one dude contacts Penelope Woodmore to tell her that they found it. So does this sound like she's just looking for Desmond? No, it sounds like she's monitoring for electromagnetic events. Now, if she's monitoring for electromagnetic events in order to find Desmond, then how does she know these events are related to Desmond's location? This implies not only that she knows about the island, but also she knows about its magical abilities. In fact, in later seasons, when we learn the island moves and is hard to find, it makes some sense that she would look for electromagnetic events in order to find it. But then again, there's a whole Stardarmer station still in Los Angeles built exactly to find the island. But maybe she doesn't know about that. In fact, it wouldn't surprise me that she had no idea that Desmond was on the island at all, and it's just happy coincidence that he happens to be there. It kind of fits that she'd know about the island, considering that her father is Charles Widmore, who has close ties to the island as he used to be the leader of the others, and it's possible she'd know Desmond was on the island, as it's established there are cameras in the Swan station that are filming them, so it's possible there could be a feed off island that she has access to. But why then is she looking for electromagnetic events that would only occur if he failed to push the button, in which case they'd all die? These are all interesting questions, and none of them were addressed. In fact, it sounds like it could lead to tons of interesting and fascinating storylines that sound awesome, that explore the world of Lost. What's Penny's backstory? What does she know about the island? What's her connection with Charles Widmore? What exactly were those guys looking for? Why were they looking for electromagnetic events? Lots of cool, great storylines could have happened from this, but they didn't. Like, the final scene was amazing. It opened up the door. It opened the door wide open for tons of potential story threads to follow up. But instead of going through the door, the writers just ignored the door, gave it the middle finger, and eventually just slammed it shut. It's a shame. It's a real shame. So when I watch this scene now, I can't help but get sad at all the amazing follow-up that we never got. Anyway, that is all I have for spoilers, so I'll see you guys in 2 weeks for my How I Would Write Lost Season 2 video. Take care.